Move on to the conversation. Two small town boys who've made it very big indeed. Amitava Kumar and Manu Joseph, armed and dangerous, of words and lovers.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Anuja. I mean, that's lovely. I mean, she sells more copies than both of us put
Yeah,
together.
that's true.
Actually, more than Amitava. Actually,
Exactly my thoughts. Nahin, as most of you might know, Anuja was behind those campaigns like Ye Dil Mange More, Mera Number Kab Aayega, and then what was that other one? It was Oye Bubbly. Huh? So I asked her to sign my book, copy of her book, Those Pricey Thakur Girls. The inscription has a question. Me, Anuja, Mera Number Kab Aayega? Anuja has written, Aaj aa gaya baby, today is your lucky day. So thank you for being here, everyone, and thank you for that intro.
Great. There is a big risk involved, and I mean, actually, Amitava is not my friend. I don't know him that well. I want to just say that up front. He's a professional contact, but there's a risk involved in this because then you have to read their book, and it has to be good, and you have to like it. Otherwise, you have to pretend to like it. And I had another thing, which is a personal problem, because Amitava is a fantastic conversationalist. He's very funny, he's very charming, and people kind of like him, which is a very alien kind of a thing for me. So I'm very suspicious because usually when I read the copy of very likable men, the copy is not up to scratch usually, you know. So I would have been normally suspicious, but I'm familiar with his work and I have a lot of respect for his work. And not surprisingly, The Lovers did not disappoint at all. In The Lovers, a Bihari goes to America, which by itself might seem funny, and it is. But this character, what is interesting, and I feel a lot of reviews didn't mention, is that this character does not resist anything. He's open to all experiences, and he experiences America because in his core he is I was almost said Bengali, but big difference. He's a Bihari, and he knows that nothing will change his core, and in this novel the character interprets America through two important muscles that men have. One is surprise brain, the brain, okay, and there's an extremely intelligent and intellectual interpretation of a foreign culture. And also employed is the most egalitarian muscle in a man's body. It is a very sexual novel too. Amitava, I felt as though I was really watching a beautiful ship pass. So thank you so much.
That was an amazing introduction. I must say I'll fail at this task because I was involved in two panels before this panel, while Manu had all the time to compose his thoughts in that little green room behind there. Many of you would have read his novels. And most of you, if not all of you, have encountered Manu Joseph's high-octane energy in his columns. In his columns, he's always an equal opportunity offender. The right loves to hate him. The left certainly loves to hate him. And he reciprocates all these feelings in equal measure. In a country where most romances are only one-sided, Manu Joseph's romance with his compatriots is the only two-sided affair. Hai ki nahi, boss? I don't know how many of you were there at the previous panel, but there was a discussion about how the line between fiction and nonfiction is getting blurred, and how the real world comes flooding into a novel often. For a journalist who has been skilled at reporting, what is also important about Manu's latest book, Miss Laila, Armed and Dangerous, is that it draws on something that has, for a long time in India, for the last few years, occupied central attention. The killing of Ishrat Jahan and the Sohrabuddin case. And one of the things that is of interest to me as a writer and also as a critic is how successfully fiction here does something more than what news can ever do. So you have the news, you have the killings, but there is always also the interest in developing the interior lives of people. Who was this young woman who was killed? What were the circumstances under which she was killed? Who was a witness to it? Who was a troubled witness to it? Almost in a way where op-ed pieces in newspapers present opinions or one view, the fiction actually allows a more capacious view, so that we are seeing this with a different idea of dramatic tension. And I think it's a remarkable achievement. So we hope to get to that a little bit during our conversation, how you managed to do that. All right. Where should we go from here, boss?
Do you think the world is bored of men? Because when the two central characters in my book are women, and it was very difficult for me to write that, because even I myself was bored of men. And there's a certain kind of a dark, amused humor which I thought I could write in my sleep, and it didn't seem to interest me at all. But your book is a very, very unambiguously a male point of view. Do you think, how do you view my question as whether the world is bored of men and the male point of view?
Since we mostly encounter the male viewpoint, what is especially of interest is to, in some ways, discover the other viewpoint. And I think particularly with sexuality, the idea of someone coming short because you're encountering women whose views and whose experience are different from you, almost as if an exploration of not only shortcoming from a male viewpoint, but also an exploration of guilt. You know, you have failed in, there's that great line of Faiz, कुछ इश्क किया, कुछ काम किया, आखिर तंग आकर हमने दोनों को अधूरा छोड़ दिया. I loved a little, I worked a little, at last getting tired, I left both of them incomplete, right? That I think is a male viewpoint. So how to discover the piquancy, the poignance, also the critical view of the other side. And so I was thinking that yes, it would be more interesting to in some ways see the male encounter his shortcoming and then reveal women in a different, in a way almost explore what my narrator would not have done as a younger person, because, he was falling in love and then falling in love and then falling in love. So how to do it from a more distant viewpoint,
Actually, in fiction, people don't realize there are two very important elements which are usually very factual, which is an analysis of gender and description of places. Yes. We never fabricate those things. That is because if we are accurate about things you can't be fooled by, then you will believe that everything else is also true. Or at least that is my approach. So maybe we have to come back to what is factual about a novel. For example, in my novel, to present what my novel is about, Miss Laila, Armed and Dangerous, a building collapses in Bombay, and in the debris, there is a man who is dying, and the soldiers dig a tunnel to reach him. And the only person who can reach him is a small, athletic young woman. And she realizes that he's mumbling something. And then we find out that he's giving away the real-time information of a Muslim couple which is headed somewhere to carry out a terror operation. And it looks like, based on what this man in the debris is saying, there is an intelligence officer who's shadowing the young couple. So the novel is The Chase. The novel is set across 8 hours. But it was inspired by a gentleman called Narendra Modi, strangely, though he does not appear in the synopsis. It was 2014, and I felt that the society around me was going crazy. Because it was almost like a Harry Potter thing. And people were crossing over, and you had to pick a side. And I thought this is a very fascinating character to describe in fiction. I really thought he belongs in fiction. But I also would like to point out that all characters in my book are fictitious. And as And as I insist, as the RSS and Mr. Modi will assert, they are fictitious. But it began from there. But then a story is important to me. Usually people talk about the political side of a novel, everything. But a story and character, I mean, these things are extremely important to me. How do you view facts?
Okay, I just want to say that you find passages in Manu's book where you have lines like, "Why are Muslims so filthy?" Damodar Bhai said a few weeks ago, standing on a stage. 50,000 people burst out laughing. The crowds cheered him on to say more, and he gave them a long analysis of why they are filthy. He said, "The Hindu man and wife abide by a family planning slogan, 'We too, ours too.' The crowds clapped as though they were all joint inventors of contraception, but they were so excited because they knew what was coming. A Muslim man takes 4 wives, and what do they all say in the bedroom? 'We too, ours 25. Okay? And then we have this, if you read what was reported in Time magazine after the Gujarat riots, when the elections rolled around, Mr. Modi, the fictitious Mr. Modi, did say things like this. And the crowd did erupt in applause. All right?
It's a pure coincidence.
Pure coincidence. And then, what I like about the quotation and then how Manu sets up the context, elaborates on it, is when he says things like, in his analysis of Damodar Bhai, this character, Damodar Bhai says things in public that most leaders only say in private. And he goes on. He says, some days after he speaks the mind of a Hindu, the Hindu's mind may not seem so impressive, but most of the time, he reassures his people that they are not alone in their thoughts, that very powerful men who have gone somewhere in life have similar views. That is what Damodar Bhai is. He's not right. He's not wrong. He's a secret thought that people have already thought. What I love, yeah, that deserves some applause. We have moved beyond simple lucid statements of the op-ed. We are still in the realm of fiction, but now there is a different understanding. And it's prismatic because the light now shines on various people, various characters as they come in. Now, to return to Manu's question, Gabriel Garcia Marquez once said that you can have someone ascending to the heavens, the angel ascending to the heavens. But if that angel is wrapped in a bed sheet and you describe very specifically what the pattern on the bed sheet is, people will actually accept that the angel is ascending to the heavens. Okay? Just a little bit of reality which allows you to imagine more. So I understand what you're saying about how you have to be faithful to, for example, space, right? I did try. I went, in trying to understand, my narrator at some point is trying to understand what were other diasporics, other Indians doing abroad, And I was struck by, if you go to the National Archives in Delhi, you find these letters of young revolutionaries like Hardayal. Cool? I didn't make up any of that. You find these letters by young revolutionaries that are full of sexual anguish. And I wanted to represent that part, and so I just cribbed those lines and put it in the book. In the same way as one of the main characters in my book is a professor who was a real man, Iqbal Ahmed, who was tried in the 70s for conspiring to kidnap Kissinger during the Vietnam War. So, the trial transcripts, I have done that. So, I have done that, but I was curious whether you, when you describe the killing of Miss Laila, her arrest before that, some of which we know, some of which we don't from news, did you describe, for example, the gas station? Is there a telephone booth?
I'm sure there is a telephone booth in a gas station, yeah. But those are the small things that we make. Otherwise, the core, in fact, a lot of people, when they want to attempt fiction, or maybe when we were younger, when we are trying to write fiction, we think we have to make up a lot of things. But actually, there's a lot of reality that you tend to underestimate, when you're a recipient. For example, anything like you see this scar on my forehead. I don't know if you can see it. It was from a childhood fall. And it was not a major fall, just maybe 5 or 6 stitches. But I never understood why it's so ugly. In fact, every child now asks me, what is this thing? I just learned last month that after my fall, my mother took me to a doctor who stitched it, but she was a gynecologist. So which completely explains the scar. Maybe she thought nobody is going to notice. It's just in the middle of my forehead. Maybe if you ask a gynecologist to stitch something, I think this is how she's going to stitch it. Like, as a moment in the novel, you think that this is completely fabricated, but I see life is filled with moments like that and much darker stuff. Recently, a friend from the RSS had sued me for defamation for something I did when I was the editor. And of course, when I went to the court, he said that I liked serious men, and we had that kind of a conversation, but he was out to get me in court. But he also told me about a friend of his who was very angered by Kejriwal's burning of the Indian Constitution, the pages from the Indian Constitution. And that lawyer wanted the right to burn the Quran. And he said, why, if the Indian Constitution can be burned, why can't I be allowed to burn the Quran? He really wanted to burn stuff. The court, of course, threw out his plea. So what he would do is, at the end of the day, he would buy Quran on the way back to his home, go to the kitchen, and burn the books. Of course, then I think his wife objected. Then he'll go to the terrace, and he would collect Quran and keep burning it. And you don't have to... What journalism taught me is that if you keep talking to people, you will encounter things which you just can't, you can't make up this kind of stuff. In fact, the problem with a novel sometimes is that people think, oh, this is far-fetched. And sometimes you have to really temper down reality to be convincing.
Yeah. I have a story there. I was walking through Nagpada in Mumbai with Suketu Mehta, who, of course, as you know, is the writer of Maximum City. And he said that is where he would meet these folks who were employed as shooters by the underworld. And he told me about going and talking to one guy who told him that he was in jail near Chandigarh. And Suketu said, what did you do in jail? And the shooter said, it was my job to clean the gallows where people were hung. So Suketu said, what were you cleaning? He said, parrots used to fly overhead. It was an open, there was no roof. The gallows where the people were hung didn't have a roof. It was an open-air theater of brutality. So, ऊपर से जब these parrots used to fly, he said, I would have to clean bird shit, but also pieces of the tongue. Because people would bite their tongues. And Suketu said, no way, if I was a novelist, could I have imagined that. You actually have to hear that, there's nothing radical than reality, Comrade Lenin said. And one thing though, can I add to that? I was on the flight from America, I happened to be watching The English Patient. And, I've taught that book. And there are details of the sapper who diffuses the bombs. And I knew that Michael Ndache must have researched that, and I was reminded of the kind of work that is involved. And then I came to the section where the Ralph Fiennes character says to his colleague as he is leaving, it's a very serious situation, war has broken out. He stops him. What was his name? He stops him and says, that depression.
That's your phone.
Sorry about that. It's like my wife saying, can you just stop talking about that? He says, what is that depression at the bottom of a woman's neck? What is it called? And the colleague says, get a hold of yourself, man. And he walks away. And later, we are told what it is called. And I also wondered at that point, okay, I can understand Michael's research of the sapper. How did he find out, or how did he go about researching what is that depression at the bottom of a neck called? Does anyone know in the audience? No, all right. But that's the sort of research we needed to do. One research that occurs in both our books, is it okay if I mention that, Manu?
Sure. I don't know what you're going to say, but...
Yeah. There is one line, isn't it an amazing thing? There's one line that occurs in both our books. And it says, there are 237 reasons why people... A scientific research was carried out. There are 237 reasons that the people who were polled, they cited for having sex. I researched that by just having come across it in Harper's. How did you research it?
Well, there's a slight difference. In my book, two researchers claim that there are 257 reasons why women have sex. So I think you've misquoted their research, and you've made it more secular for some reason. Yeah.
This is Manu's constant complaint against the left.
And the finding of the research is that women have sex because they want to. And that is, I think that's a complete waste of academic time.
Yes. Yeah. One thing that struck me is that you have a very interesting witness. A man who is a police officer who witnesses the acts of brutality. Okay? And he's very concerned about what is going to happen to the girl. He's observing a process unfold that he thinks is fatal. And here is a line. He's tired of his focus on the girl, tired of his compassion, which has been fierce for the past several hours. His compassion is not a farce, but there is an honest question he has asked himself many times in his career. How does he endure such extraordinary miseries of people that he witnesses almost every day in his work life? And I wondered, is that true for a journalist also? That is not my phone. Is that true of a journalist also, boss?
Actually, yes. I mean, as a journalist, one thing which I found very hard to understand is how some people can be in the proximity of so much human misery for so long. And I realized that some of them, not all of them, some of them are actually sadists. In fact, we think that sadists must be in some kind of a one-room house living with the mom and stepping out at night. But most sadists, as in my journalistic experience, find themselves exactly in the place where a savior is expected to be in, because they want to be a witness to these mysteries, and sometimes they themselves don't know it. They seem to be great pleasure in talking about such things we won't be able to even contemplate. So I feel a journalist's job is not to be swayed by these people who seem to be compassionate, but maybe sometimes to ask, how can they do this? What is going on? And sometimes the answers could be quite interesting.
Okay. One of the things, one of the protagonists in Manu's novel does is she's skeptical of easy claims to compassion. Would you agree with that? Yes. She's not only questioning, she's often contemptuous of people's claims to be righteous citizens. And at one place, she says, while interviewing someone who has worked on issues of, let's say, farmers' suicide, she says to him, if we look at the matter statistically, sir, poor Indians in the agricultural industry are least likely, I repeat, least likely to kill themselves than richer Indians or even South Koreans in general or Australian farmers in particular. I understand the skepticism, but I want to know, is that true?
Yeah, it is true, actually. We have been led to believe that, it depends on what is convenient, that if it is a Dalit scholar who has committed suicide, it has to be for ideological reasons, and if it's a farmer who has committed suicide. But nobody seems to want to accept that there could be depression, which could be the reason for the suicide, no matter what your ideology is. actually. Though I think that at this point we have to talk about sex in your novel.
People are getting. Yeah.
So I want to come back to the sexual nature of your novel. So at your advanced age, is it something that is it a memory of your younger self, gentlemen, or is it just conjecture, or is it something that people don't understand that this is how men are, and everything that we do, there is the sexual drive under it.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know how many of you were there on the first day when I was in conversation with Leela Slimani, French writer, wonderful writer. She has written a great book called The Perfect Nanny. It's titled Lullaby in England. Now, we discover in the very first line that the nanny has killed the children who are in her care. And I asked her, what is this book about? And she said, it's not so much about nanny killing the children. This is about loneliness, which my friend Lisette yesterday said. What she meant probably was this is about being alone. Cool? If you keep that in your mind, now let's come to Manu's question. Yes, the narrative often is about these sexual encounters, lovers. But I thought it was about age. You know, the body, I wanted to say, the body forgets. So as Manu rightly observed, I'm of a certain advanced age, and I wanted to carry out the novelist's task of remembering what is being forgotten. And so I wanted to forget. I wanted to remember, that's a Freudian, I wanted to remember what was slipping away, which was passion. To remember what had been that youthful exaltation of feeling that the sight of someone made you suddenly think that, waves were coming at you and you were being lifted by it. And I wanted to remember that because I wanted to remember how was it possible that every day I boarded the university special, I was falling in love again with someone. You know what I'm saying? And then writing little poems about it. And I thought, let's carry that further. And then also record in some ways, now that I have more experience, what has become easy, or how has love become easy? Why was it difficult at another time? And I also wanted to remember when there wasn't Dr. Mahinder Vatsa to give you advice about sex in the columns of Mumbai Mirror. What would my questions be at that time about sex? What did I not know? Does that make sense?
Can you give us an example of what you didn't know when you were in Bihar? No, just be truthful, because there's something which Shoaib Akhtar, the Pakistani fast bowler, told me when I interviewed him.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't seem like an intellectual if you know him, but he said, like most philosophical thugs do, he said, look, people can see through your face. They know when you're speaking the truth. They know when you're lying. So, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I love the candor of these questions. The truth is rarely spoken at JLF, and I want to be truthful. Okay, first of all, for those who do not every day read the sex column written by Mahinder Vatsa, who, it must be noted, talking about advanced age, is 93 years old now. May he live long. The questions that
That's
are
almost
asked,
stiff, yeah.
The questions that are asked of him. The questions that are asked of him are, my girlfriend kissed the tip of my penis and the next day she suffered a stomachache. Could she be pregnant? Should she take some pills? And Dr. Mahinder Vatsa, again, I have just transcribed from reality. Dr. Mahinder Vatsa's response was, she must have had dinner afterwards and that probably led to the stomachache. Oral sex does not cause pregnancy and she need not take any pills. Cool? Now my narrator, and this might be autobiographical, says, the Sexpert column can now be read on the internet. There was nothing like this when I was growing up in India. If at that time I could have written one, which letter would have been mine? The range of problems people present to the doctor is stunning. But yes, this one. Question. In the last semester, I failed one subject. My parents got worried and took me to an astrologer. He asked me to remove my pants. He said the ejaculate after masturbation is equal to 100 milliliter of blood, hence my weakness. I'm regretting showing him my penis. Please help. And in my book, Dr. Vatsar replies, the astrologer is a hoax and completely ignorant of sexual matters. Masturbation is completely normal. Visit your college counselor instead to discuss you're not doing well in one subject.
Do you think sex and love, which are two different things, are underrated elements of cultural assimilation for men?
Why are they different? Tum bolo na, from speaking from your own vast experience.
I feel that everybody is capable of sex, but not everybody is capable of love. So I feel, in fact, what is interesting about the male narrator in Amitava's book is a very honest characterization. You know, usually when Indian writers write about men, they're very refined and they kind of know the upholstery and color of the curtains and so forth. Some very gentle, delicate people who are very good people. But this guy is actually a delinquent and he actually doesn't fall in love. He's a passionate man, but love escapes him. So do you think this thing that everybody talks about in art, which is in the heart of art, do you think that this is actually an impossibility for most people?
You know, I do not share the virile Malayalis view that everyone is capable of sex, because my most persistent memory of being a student at Delhi University and taking the train from Patna was to pass through endless miles of landscape where the most common advertisement was for premature ejaculation. I don't know whether it happens still in India, but at that time, over and over again, painted on all the boundary walls that bordered the railway lines was, please call. And then, as if a story was being led to its natural teleological end, by the time you reached Delhi, it was, rishte hi rishte mil tole. It was for the advertisement for matrimonial agencies. So I should confess, at that age, I dreaded both sex and marriage. I thought, bada problem is, there's lots of complications. So first of all, I do not agree that everyone is capable of sex. It's a learned behavior. And I also do not agree that everyone is capable of love. That too is a learned behavior. And I think I was trying to approach the idea of under what conditions do you fall in love or you fall out of love? And how do you make yourself able to love again? Or persuade someone else that you are still capable of loving them? And so hence that process, you know? Does that make sense?
It does. I also wanted to ask you, when you were writing, are you worried that your family is going to read all this stuff?
No. My family doesn't read. My wife read my first novel rather hurriedly. May I demonstrate it? It was like this. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm just looking for the parts about sex to make sure that you have not written about us. I asked her if she would read this book that has come out, and she said, nah, it makes me uncomfortable, you with other women, which was a fair thing. You know, another story. May I tell you a story? David Devidar asked me to write about my town, and I wrote something, A Matter of Rats, about Patna, because rats had carried away my mother's dentures, and I thought that was a starting point. And then I read a news item which said rats were drinking the confiscated liquor in the police station. I thought, let me write about it. But then, I would go out every day with these little notebooks, interview people and come home. One day I was transcribing from this because Naipaul, he told me that when he would come back from doing his interviews, what made him a writer really was that before he went to sleep, he would type it out. And that gave a form to his narrative, all right? So I was doing that and I heard my two sisters talking. My sister said that her brother-in-law was having an affair with the receptionist in the hospital that he owned, that they would go to the gym across the road for sex. So I put that in my book. And then the Hindustan Times quoted that in the review of the book. My sister called me, "Kya kar diye tum?" And I said, "Relax. That guy doesn't read. No one reads in our family. Kya? There's no problem." And I have so far, despite this public pronouncement, I know I'm safe and my sister is safe. Bihar hai bhaiya. No. Why Bihar? It's also Rajasthan. How many of you are going to buy the books that we are going to sign after this? You know?
Yeah, I think. I was about to say, I think you should have just said our nation would execute a 19-year-old girl in cold blood. Nobody will object to that.
That's a very good point. And that is what your book is about.
No, it's not.
I mean, it is.
No, it's not.
Acha, theek hai. What's lovely, I'm not giving anything away if I say Manu implies inaccurately that it's about the execution of a girl. And he's right, because there's so many other things. But what's interesting is that even if you know what's going to happen, even if you know what's in the news, and you know the truth, you still want to turn over the pages to discover what happened to these particular people in this book, which I think is a great achievement to produce narrative tension. The other thing I want to ask you is that there is this coil of surprise, which I think is what Vishal Bharadwaj means when he says cinematic and poetic, a multi-layered and taut thriller, which is also full of humor, a definite page turner. So I want to ask you, maybe you wrote one draft, and then did you try to alter the structure to have that surprise and to have those revelations that function with such tautness?
Yeah, but first of all, I want to say I'm just glad I'm not Manoj Knight Shyamalan discussing Sixth Sense with him. You know, I think...
I didn't get the joke.
Okay, fine.
None of the audience did too.
Yeah, to me, because a story I respect the story, and I feel that the word entertainment is greatly maligned in what is called literary fiction. The only form of humility I have is the need to reach out to the readers, and yeah, it's something which you can only hope you're not boring, actually, because a bore is a person who doesn't know he's boring, actually, and if he knew, he wouldn't be a bore. But you try, you use your intuition and your instinct, and so I feel the respect for a story and structure greatly helps, and I spend months on getting the structure right and getting the story right. And I feel that this is probably one of the best stories I've ever written in terms of just a story. Yeah.
Congratulations. Is it okay to take a couple of questions for a few minutes? Yeah? From if people want to ask something of Manu in particular? There's a gentleman leaping there.
Hey, thank you first of all for a great talk. And the question is for both of you. If both of you can answer, it will be great. And I'll come right to the question. And it's about something you mentioned in your talk itself. It's about the burning of the Quran. I know you talked about a lot of sexy things also. But about the Quran and about religion, actually, when I was in America, I went as a Hindu. I used to pray every day. Then I met some guys and I kind of lost the faith. And when I came back to India, I was seeing a lot of YouTube videos on atheist experience, and I liked the format. It's a big show in Texas. And I was talking to my dad, why can't we have such a show in Hindi? That's the most popular language. People will at least learn something. We can have an honest opinion, and we can say what we think. And my dad is a Hindu. He believes in astrology, numerology, you name it, Vastu, whatnot. But he's very intellectual, so he agrees with me, kind of. So the question is that there's a law. You can't talk about religion almost, because anybody can say, you hurt my sensibilities, as you pointed out, RSS, and there are so many people out there. You just can't say what you think, and it's just an opinion. You can say that football team is the worst team.
Got it.
Why? When will that law go away? There are two laws. One is like you can't disturb the balance between religions, that was questioned when somebody actually burned the Quran in the court. And then that time he pleaded that I didn't disturb the balance between any religion because I just targeted Muslims. I just burned the Quran, nothing else. So you can't punish me for disturbing the balance. It's just Muslim religion. So then they came up with a law where you can't even
I think
target
they
a
should
single religion.
come up with a law to limit the length
there
of
are
questions.
there are two laws. You know the laws. Now tell me about it, both of you, please.
A few years.
Excuse me. Here I want to totally embody Naipaul and say, that question does not interest me.
I'll give a very non-Naipaul-like, decent kind of an answer. About 4 years ago, when the Pope resigned, it was very unusual because he's supposed to die. But he resigned and there was a vacancy. I applied for the job of the Pope. I was the editor of Open Magazine. I sent in my application stating that I have all the required qualities and also that I've been married for so long that I'm a celibate, if that is a problem. And I also said that they wanted a Pope who's of sound mind, and I pointed out that among the 80-year-old virgins, you'll never find one. And I also said that to just make India look good, and this is a fact, that the strongest drink in the world, alcohol, is called Jesus Christ. You will find it in Kerala. It's called Jesus Christ because after you have it, you will rise only on the third day. So the thing is, we can do it in India. You might get away. Or there could be some crazy guy in Bandra who will take me to court. There is no system. Nobody knows. As an editor, I never knew what will take me to jail and what I would get away with. And it is all ambiguous. And I think that is also the beauty of India. India is the freest country at the civic level, and at many other levels. And there is an obscenity law also, but then if it's Kama Sutra, you can carry any kind of obscenity. But otherwise, you can't. But then nobody really goes to jail for that, but sometimes you can. Sometimes you get away with saying things, sometimes you get shot. So there is no, as I said in Calcutta, it's exactly like driving. I think Indian traffic is a training for everything else. You can get away or you won't get away. It's like, but the only thing is, as Indians, we should not be surprised. And because India, I think India is a video game and the contest is the one who is surprised loses first. And that's what we should learn from our politicians. We keep condemning our politicians, that there is something very Indian about it. Sorry, I keep repeating this phrase. It is inspired, by the way, from Simi Garaiwal, who described a man as man, which I thought was the most beautiful description of a man. So I said, but like you take Modi or Amit Shah, they're very Indian way. They have a certain Indian intelligence. And what we should learn from this, why they are never surprised. Because when you're home, you're never surprised.
Hi, Manu. I have two questions for you. First of all, big fan, and it's very overwhelming to hear you in person today. So I really cherish this opportunity. The two questions I have for you are the first one on the illicit happiness of other people. Wanted to understand from you what sort of prompted that book, because it's so layered and captures just so many thoughts and ideas, especially the concept of happiness being an inescapable. That's one. The second question for you is, your first two novels, Serious Men and Illicit Happiness, were both very layered, deep, intense, whereas I felt Laila was a little linear, sort of a quick read or a page turner, as Amitava also pointed out, and as it says in the prologue as well. How did that happen? Okay,
thanks. When I was around 16 or 17 in Chennai, I got into a phase where I wanted to search for the truth. So I think it's a very adolescent thing. I'm very surprised these days guys don't go in search of truth when they're 17. But then I got very friendly with a guy who seemed to suggest that he knows what truth is. And it is all encoded in Hindu scriptures. And then I spent a lot of time trying to understand. But as I grew older, I understood even the pursuit of truth as a psychiatric condition, which really fascinated me. And I thought, what if the world and all the strong emotions in the world, all the strong sentiments are created by people with very strong psychiatric conditions, and we all only try to imitate very powerful psychiatric conditions. What if that is what everything is about? And that is where illicit happiness of other people is an argument that all important things in this world are in different psychiatric states. That's why I asked Amitava about love also. When we read about love in our own mythologies and others, that kind of crazy love is the only kind of love, and most of us don't seem to feel it. It's very similar to when I was in Chennai, a servant maid got married and then she looked very dejected after that. When we asked her, she said that we don't run around trees. We are not running, he's not chasing me, he's not catching me. And she was serious because she thought that kind of cinematic love is true. And this is what happens after you find love. But at a more sophisticated level, many of us are also imitating more powerful artistic things. So that was the argument behind that. Now, I sense the rebuke in your tone for Miss Laila, armed and dangerous. I let that pass. But I was trying to attempt a very different kind of... I was trying to attempt a thriller. Because some of the messages in Miss Laila were very dense, and I wanted to... for me, a story is an ideas delivery device. So that was the attempt.
Maybe one more question.
I don't know on what basis we are supposed to decide who is... that always baffled me. So I would leave it to...
Hi. One of the things that I always struggle with is to maintain intellectual honesty, like not letting my biases or prejudices affect how I think. I think that is something that I like a lot about you, that you always come from a place of intellectual honesty, in my opinion. Do you struggle with it? And if yes, is there a truth test that you have when you're going through a crisis of what do you really want to think about, or what do you really believe in?
I think that question is for you because I'm intellectually dishonest. So I think that question is for you.
No, it's for the both of you. Yeah.
No, but why do you say you're intellectually dishonest?
I was joking, boss.
So it was not a confession, but...
No.
But you are an academic, so...
Well, one of the things that I dislike about academic culture is that you're always supposed to be clothed in righteousness. It breeds defense. I like the thoughtfulness that comes with being an academic because you're thinking about everything. But I also I despise the defensiveness that comes with it. And one of the things that I found liberating about doing writing or moving out of academia is precisely moving into a more transgressive terrain where one can expose oneself to, among other things, ridicule and criticism, because I'm not so anxious about being right anymore. I'm just trying to find a space for saying something to which you are welcome to then respond with vehemence if you want. What about you, boss?
But it is somewhat based in my... Sorry, I stole your applause. This again is somewhat rooted in the 17-year-old searching for what is truth and then finding out that this most powerful thing is also a myth. And that was very important to me to understand that everything is pointless. It doesn't mean life is not worth living. In fact, precisely because life is pointless, I feel you should run marathons and you should focus on many things and intellectuality and learn calculus and everything because there's no point anyway, But when you have that understanding and you look at these extremely articulate men on NDTV and others, and you know that verbal articulation is charlatan. There is something, because life is complex. All ideas are ambiguous. how come you're so confident? So that's a question which I always, and I know the holes in the argument, because if you just listen to them, because even the whole act of debate, intellectuality, debate, for instance, is highly overrated. I call it the T20 of intellectual activities. I don't know what's the whole point in a debate. I think you need to meditate, you need to sit and think about what you want to say. But we have culture where the guy who can debate very well seems to score some points, which to me is meaningless. So when you begin to question, I feel that it can be very tiring to question everything. It is nice to belong. But also it kind of helps when you're in a situation you don't have many friends anyway, or you piss them off when you're in your 20s. So the more you are liked, the more, that's the thing. That's why, see, that is the problem. When you are loved, when you are this college romantic, for example, like Anuja Kumar is, or you have to play to the galleries, even though you know what's going on. So that's why I think it's like I say this, there is a time when you have to stop being the lover when you're a writer and become the husband, which is a more difficult thing, I feel. I'm sorry if I'm sounding old-fashioned.
You've been a great audience. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Manu for
Thank
being
you so much.
such a generous